This is Christopher Lewis for FXCOINZ, taking a look at crypto. The crypto backdrop right now is pretty ugly, as I'm sure most of you know, but I would point out that despite the fact that we have a lot of rhetoric and smashing of teeth out there, the reality is that the markets are pretty stable. And that for me means that they are worth paying attention to because in an environment that is pure chaos around the world, you have a situation where Bitcoin and Ethereum, which we'll look at, both seem a little bit boring. And boring is the beginning of turning things around. Keep in mind that institutions are most certainly involved in these markets still, and they will look to run them up as soon as they feel like taking on risk appetite. In this environment with global trade tensions and of course spats between even allies, it does make a certain amount of sense that money flows to things like gold, which are safer, more established. But eventually, we start talking about money printing and loose monetary policy from a couple of different central banks, and that perhaps has people running to crypto eventually. Looking at Bitcoin, you can see that the $84,000 level continues to be a bit of a floor in the market, and I just don't see why market participants would get short here. Now, having said that, I also recognize that you have a scenario where we have been very boring, very sideways, but we are sitting on top of what I think is pretty decent support. Because of this, I'm looking for a bounce to take advantage of. And we did get that a couple of weeks ago. I think that will be the play. And later this year, I expect to see $107,000, but it's an institutional asset now. It's not going to be behaving the way it used to. In other words, it might take some time to get there, but I think you're in an area that people will look at as value. The market for Ethereum looks very much the same, with $2,700 being very supported. The 50-day EMA is basically at the $3,100 level, and the 200-day EMA is at the $3,300 level. I think those might be targets. Again, we need to have more of a risk-on type of attitude out there, so watch the NASDAQ 100. I do often use that as a bit of a gauge for crypto and risk sentiment. I don't think that we're on the precipice of some type of major, massive move higher. The sentiment is horrible with the community. That's generally when moneymakers start to look at the market, see it being very boring, and buy into it. I'm very interested in both these assets, but I recognize it could be 5 months before we fulfill any targets. That's what happened for the latest run higher in crypto, specifically Bitcoin, before we got the Wall Street trade. We were just sitting there forever. And I think a lot of people forget that. It was something like 6, 7 months of sideways action. So maybe that's what we're looking at. In the meantime, it offers a bit of a trading range, but longer term investors certainly have to be licking their chops.